There is no pain quite like the severing of a mate bond. It does not just break the heart, it shatters the soul, snapping the invisible divine tether that ties two wolves together. For Genevieve, that snap echoed in front of 300 elite guests at the Montgomery estate. He looked her dead in the eye, surrounded by champagne flutes and silk gowns, and called her a worthless half-breed. He chose a political alliance over his destined mate, leaving her broken in the rain. But the universe has a wicked sense of justice. He thought he was throwing away a peasant. He didn't know he was discarding a future queen. The annual winter solstice gala at the Silver Pines estate was less of a celebration and more of a ruthless display of power. Nestled deep in the wealthy enclaves of the Pacific Northwest, the Montgomery Pack House was a sprawling mansion of glass, steel, and ancient cedar. Outside, the December rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted venison, and the underlying, feral musk of 300 wolves playing at being civilized. Genevieve Hayes stood near the kitchen doors, practically invisible. At 21, she was a ghost within the Silver Pines pack. Her mother had been a rogue who died in childbirth. Her father, a low-ranking guard who drank himself to death before Genevieve turned 10. She was tolerated, allowed to live in the cramped attic of the pack's boarding house, paying her way by assisting the catering staff during high society events. Tonight, however, a strange fever burned beneath Genevieve's skin. The pack doctor had told her she was a late bloomer, her wolf dormant, likely due to her weak bloodline, but tonight, her senses were impossibly sharp. She could hear the clinking of ice in a bourbon glass from 50 yards away. She could smell the crisp, intoxicating aroma of cedarwood, bergamot, and a dark, rolling thunderstorm. The scent was pulling her, a magnetic force dragging her out from the shadows of the catering prep area and into the grand ballroom. There, standing beneath a massive crystal chandelier, was Andrew Montgomery. Andrew had ascended to Alpha only 3 months prior, following the sudden death of his father. He was a striking man, built like a titan, with eyes the color of winter frost and a jawline carved from granite. He was dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, looking every inch the billionaire wolf he was. Beside him stood Victoria Beaumont, the daughter of the neighboring Blue Ridge Alpha. Victoria was draped in red silk, a Cartier diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. The Beaumont family controlled the largest shipping ports on the West Coast, and the whispers of a merger between the two packs had been circulating for weeks. As Genevieve stepped onto the edge of the ballroom floor, Andrew froze. Mid-sentence, his icy eyes snapped toward her. The invisible tether between them pulled taut. It was a physical sensation, a violent collision of souls that made Genevieve gasp out loud. Mate. The word echoed in her mind, not in her own voice, but in the deep, ancient growl of her newly awakened wolf. Andrew's nostrils flared. He stared at Genevieve in her plain, ill-fitting black uniform, her hair tied back in a messy knot, her face pale and devoid of makeup. She saw the flash of recognition in his eyes. She saw the primal possessiveness flare in his irises, turning them completely silver. But a second later, she saw something else. Calculation. And then, disgust. The music faded as the Alpha's sudden silence drew the attention of the room. Victoria Beaumont noticed Andrew's gaze and followed it, her lip curling into a sneer. Genevieve took a trembling step forward. Andrew, she whispered. The room was so quiet that her voice carried. Andrew stepped away from Victoria. He walked toward Genevieve, his heavy footsteps echoing on the imported marble floor. The crowd parted for him. Genevieve's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She thought he was coming to claim her. She thought, for one fleeting, naive second, that the moon goddess had finally granted her a piece of happiness. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. Up close, the scent of him was overwhelming, making her knees weak. Alpha, she breathed, looking up into his face. Andrew's expression was a mask of cold, unyielding stone. He looked her up and down, taking in her scuffed shoes and the stain on her apron. Then, he looked back at his pack, the wealthy, the powerful, the elite who were watching with bated breath. Is this a joke? Andrew's voice boomed, carrying a cruel edge that sliced through the silent ballroom. Is this the moon goddess's idea of a test? Genevieve blinked, the heat draining from her body. Andrew, we are. Do not speak my name. Omega, he snarled, taking a step closer, towering over her. You are Genevieve Hayes, a half-blood mistake born of a rogue and a drunk. You hold no rank, you hold no wealth, and your wolf hasn't even had the strength to shift. and you think to stand before me, the Alpha of Silver Pines, and claim the bond." The cruelty in his words felt like a physical blow. The guests began to murmur. Laughter, cold and mocking, rippled from the Beaumont family's table. The bond. Genevieve choked out, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "You feel it. I know you feel it." "I feel a biological glitch," Andrew said, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper meant only for her, before raising it again for the crowd. "A pack is only as strong as its alpha, and an alpha is only as strong as his Luna. Silver Pines requires a Luna of breeding, of power, of strategic value." He turned slightly, extending a hand back toward Victoria, who was watching with a triumphant smirk. "Tomorrow, I announce my formal engagement to Victoria Beaumont." Genevieve let out a choked sob. The pain in her chest was blinding, a literal tearing of muscle and soul. Andrew turned back to her, his eyes dead. "I, Andrew Montgomery, Alpha of the Silver Pines Pack, reject you, Genevieve Hayes, as my mate and Luna. I sever this bond. You are nothing to me. You are nothing to this pack. Pack your things and leave my territory by sunrise. If I see your face again, you will be hunted as a rogue." The rejection hit her like a freight train. Genevieve collapsed to her knees on the marble floor, screaming in agony as the mate bond snapped. The physical pain was excruciating, feeling as though her ribs were being pried open and her heart crushed in a vice. Around her, the elite of Silver Pines did not offer help. They looked down at her with pity and contempt. Andrew did not look back. He returned to Victoria's side, signaling the orchestra to resume playing, dragging herself up from the floor, gasping for air. Genevieve looked at the man who was supposed to be her other half. He was clinking glasses with the Beaumonts, wiping the mud of rejection from her soul. A cold, dark resolve suddenly settled over her weeping wolf. She didn't say another word. She turned her back on the glittering ballroom, walked out into the freezing December rain, and disappeared into the night. For 3 weeks, Genevieve ran. She had no money, no vehicle, and a newly awakened wolf that was erratic and grieving. She survived on the edges of human towns, stealing scraps from dumpsters behind diners and sleeping in abandoned barns. The winter was brutal. She pushed northward, instinctively drawn away from the coastal dampness of Washington state toward the biting, deep freezes of the Canadian wilderness. The rejection had left a gaping, festering wound in her chest. She was operating on pure animalistic survival. But as she crossed into the dense, snow-covered pine forests of the Yukon Territory, her human body began to fail. It was a Tuesday evening when the blizzard hit. The temperature dropped to 30 below zero. Genevieve, wrapped in a stolen, threadbare wool coat, collapsed in waist-deep snow, her vision blurred, the edges of the world fading to black. She curled into a ball beneath the roots of a massive spruce tree, her breathing shallow. "This is it," she thought, the cold numbing her pain. "This is where the outcast dies." But the moon goddess was not finished with her. Through the howling wind, the heavy crunch of boots on snow broke the silence. Genevieve couldn't open her eyes, but she smelled them 3 distinct scents: pine, metal, and pure, raw power. These were not ordinary wolves. They smelled like the earth itself, ancient and terrifying. "My king, over here," a deep, gruff voice called out. "Is she dead?" another asked. "Barely breathing. She's frozen." "A rogue? Look at her," a third voice spoke. The voice was smooth as velvet, but held an authority that vibrated in Genevieve's very bones. It was a voice that commanded armies. "She is no mere rogue. Look at the silver hue of her aura. Pick her up, Sterling. We take her to the Citadel." Genevieve felt massive. Heavily gloved hands lift her effortlessly from the snowbank. The warmth of a thick fur cloak was wrapped around her. Then, darkness took her completely. When Genevieve woke, she was not in an attic or a barn. She was lying in a massive, 4-poster bed, draped in black velvet and heavy furs. The room was palatial, built of dark stone and rich mahogany, warmed by a roaring fire and a hearth the size of a small car. She bolted upright, her heart racing, only to find an IV drip connected to her arm and a woman in a crisp medical uniform checking her vitals. "You're awake," the nurse said, her voice gentle. "Please, do not panic. You are safe." "Where am I?" Genevieve croaked, her throat dry. "You are in Oakhaven, the capital of the Laurentian monarchy," a new voice answered. Genevieve turned her head. Standing in the doorway was a man who seemed to steal the oxygen from the room. He was exceptionally tall, with dark hair swept neatly back and piercing amber eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, but he didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a warrior playing dress-up. "I am Almira Allister," the man said, stepping into the room. "King of the Northern Sovereignty." Genevieve's breath hitched. The Northern Sovereignty. It was a myth in the lower states, a massive, brutally powerful kingdom of true lichens, the ancient ancestors of modern werewolves. They didn't have alphas. They had a monarchy. They didn't involve themselves in the petty squabbles of packs. They ruled the top of the world. "Why am I here?" Genevieve asked, pulling the furs up to her chin. "I'm just a banished. A half-blood from Silver Pines. I was rejected." Almira's amber eyes narrowed slightly at the word rejected. He walked to the foot of her bed, his gaze piercing. "My border patrol found you dying in the snow. I brought you back to heal you, but when my royal physician drew your blood to test for diseases, we found something else." Genevieve frowned. "What do you mean?" Almira pulled a folded piece of heavy parchment from his inner jacket pocket and laid it on the edge of the bed. "Your mother, what was her name?" I never knew her. She died when I was born. My father said she was a nameless rogue who wandered into the territory. Your father was a fool, Almira said softly, though the words carried the weight of steel. Her name was Amelia, and she was not a rogue. She was my older sister. The silence in the room was absolute. Only the crackle of the fireplace dared to make a sound. Genevieve stared at the man, her brain refusing to process the words. Amelia ran away 22 years ago, suffocated by the pressures of the lichen court, Almira explained, his voice softening with an ancient grief. We searched for her for a decade. We assumed she had been killed. We never knew she mated with a southern wolf. We never knew she had a child. No, Genevieve whispered, shaking her head. No, you're wrong. I'm a nobody, the alpha of Silver Pines. He looked right through me. He said my blood was weak. A low, terrifying growl rumbled in Almira's chest. The sheer force of the sound made the windows rattle. The alpha of Silver Pines is an arrogant whelp who wouldn't recognize true power if it severed his head. Your wolf is dormant, Genevieve, because you are not a standard werewolf. You are a royal lichen. Your transformation requires the blood ritual of our ancestors, something you could never access in the South. Almira stepped closer, offering his hand. You are Genevieve Allister, princess of the Laurentian monarchy, and because I have no heirs, you are the rightful ruling queen of the North. Over the next 3 years, Genevieve died and was reborn. The blood ritual was agonizing, stripping away the weak, human frailties she had lived with and awakening the massive, snow-white lichen beast inside her. Under Almira's fierce and protective tutelage, she learned how to fight, how to govern, and how to command. She learned the intricate politics of the Northern sovereignty. She learned multiple languages, economics, and military strategy. The timid, heartbroken girl who had wept on the marble floor of the Montgomery estate was incinerated. In her place rose a woman forged in ice and royal blood. Genevieve's beauty, once hidden behind malnutrition and grief, blossomed into something terrifyingly regal. She carried herself with an icy, untouchable grace. Almira stepped down as the ruling king, taking his place as the commander of her royal guard and her most trusted advisor. The monarchy bowed to her. She was Queen Genevieve I, the White Wolf of Oakhaven, and she had not forgotten the name Andrew Montgomery. 5 years had passed since the night of the winter solstice gala. In the southern states, the Silver Pines pack was bleeding out. Andrew Montgomery's reign, which had begun with such arrogance and promise, was crumbling. The merger with the Beaumont pack had been a disaster. Victoria Beaumont was a vain, cruel Luna who alienated the pack members and spent the pack's wealth on lavish estates and vanity projects. Worse, a new, highly organized syndicate of rogues had been attacking their borders, decimating their lumber businesses, and draining their security resources. Silver Pines was in massive debt to human banks. Andrew was desperate. He had reached out to every neighboring alpha, but his reputation for arrogance and his failing economy made him a pariah. There was only one entity on the continent wealthy enough and powerful enough to bail him out: the Laurentian monarchy. Andrew had spent 6 months petitioning the northern lichens for an audience. He sent gifts, diplomatic letters, and economic proposals. Finally, a response had arrived, stamped with the royal silver crest of a howling wolf. The newly crowned Queen of the North would agree to meet him. She would travel to his territory, to the Silver Pines pack house, to assess if his pack was worth saving. The Montgomery estate was in a frenzy of preparation. The same grand ballroom where Genevieve's heart had been ripped out was now being polished to perfection to host a monarch. Andrew stood at the front doors, smoothing the lapels of his suit. He looked older, tired. The stress of leadership had carved deep lines into his face. Next to him stood Victoria, complaining about the damp chill in the air and adjusting her diamond earrings. "I don't see why we have to bow and scrape to some northern savage," Victoria muttered. "Because this savage has a net worth of $80 billion and a standing army of 5,000 lichens," Andrew snapped, his patience long gone. "If we do not secure this alliance, Victoria, we lose the pack. You will smile, you will bow, and you will not speak unless spoken to." Outside, the crunch of tires on gravel signaled the arrival. It wasn't just a car. It was a militarized convoy. 6 matte black, bulletproof Range Rovers pulled up the long, winding driveway. The doors of the first 5 vehicles opened in unison, and 24 massive, heavily armed lichen guards stepped out. They moved with terrifying precision, forming a protective corridor leading to the center vehicle, a custom Rolls-Royce Phantom. Andrew swallowed hard, his wolf whimpering slightly in the presence of so much raw, dominant power. He stepped forward, forcing his posture into an authoritative stance. The rear door of the Rolls-Royce was opened by a guard who stood nearly 7 feet tall, Almira Allister, the Queen's commander. Almira scanned the estate with a look of utter disdain before extending a gloved hand into the dark interior of the car. A stiletto heel clicked against the wet pavement. The woman who stepped out of the vehicle stopped the breath in Andrew's throat. She was draped in a tailored white cashmere coat that swept the ground over a sleek black designer suit. Her dark hair was styled in a sharp, immaculate blowout. A stunning diamond and sapphire tiara rested subtly in her hair, a quiet statement of absolute authority. She radiated power. It was a physical aura that pressed down on the chests of every Silver Pines wolf present, forcing several lower-ranking members to automatically drop to their knees on the grass. Andrew stared. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. His wolf was going insane, clawing at his mind, howling a word he hadn't heard or felt in 5 years. Mate. But it was impossible. The Queen paused at the end of the guard corridor. She slowly raised her head, taking off a pair of dark, oversized sunglasses. Piercing, silver-flecked eyes locked onto Andrew's. Andrew physically staggered back a step, the blood draining from his face as if he had seen a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He recognized the bone structure. He recognized the shape of her eyes. But the timid, dirty, desperate girl he had broken was gone. In her place stood a god. "Genevieve?" he whispered, the name slipping out in a choked gasp of pure shock. Queen Genevieve did not smile. She did not flinch. She simply stared at him with the cold, unfeeling gaze of a predator looking at its prey. "Alpha Montgomery," Genevieve said, her voice smooth, cultured, and devoid of any warmth. It rang clearly across the silent courtyard. "I received your desperate pleas for charity. Shall we go inside? Or do you intend to make me stand in the mud?" Victoria Beaumont, ignorant of the history, stepped forward with a fake, practiced smile. "Your Majesty, welcome to Silver Pines. I am Luna Victoria, and we are so honored." Genevieve didn't even look at her. She flicked her wrist, and Almira stepped forward, raising a hand to silence the Luna. "The Queen," Almira growled, his voice vibrating with menace, "does not speak to subordinates. You will address her only when commanded." Victoria's face burned bright red, her mouth snapping shut. Andrew was trembling. The realization of what he had done, of who he had rejected, was crashing down on him like an avalanche. The mate he threw away for power was now the most powerful creature on the continent, and he had invited her into his home to beg for his life. Genevieve stepped forward, closing the distance until she was mere inches from Andrew. The scent of her no longer just rain, but snow, ozone, and absolute dominance wrapped around his throat like a vice. She leaned in slightly, her lips hovering near his ear. "You once told me to pack my things and leave your territory, Andrew," she whispered, her tone laced with venomous silk. "I have returned, but this time, I think I'll take yours." She stepped back, her face an unreadable mask of ice, and walked past him into the grand foyer of the Montgomery estate, Lyndon the Alpha standing paralyzed in the cold. The atmosphere inside the Silver Pines boardroom was suffocating. The room, paneled in dark oak and adorned with the mounted heads of rival rogue beasts, had always been a symbol of the Montgomery family's absolute authority. Today, it felt like a tomb. Genevieve took the seat at the head of the long mahogany table, Andrew's chair. Elmira stood immediately behind her right shoulder, his massive frame radiating a silent, lethal warning to anyone who dared breathe too heavily. 3 more of her royal guards flanked the doors. Andrew and Victoria were forced to sit on the opposite side, joined by Pack Elder Harrison, a graying, stern wolf who looked visibly ill. Andrew could not tear his eyes away from Genevieve. The scent of her crisp mountain air and crushing dominance was driving his wolf insane. The regret was a physical acid eating through his stomach. He had rejected this. He had traded a goddess for a pawn. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries, Alpha Montgomery," Genevieve began, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. She didn't open the leather-bound dossier placed in front of her. She already knew every number inside it. "You requested a bailout of $45 million to save your lumber mills and pay off the private military contractors defending your eastern borders." Andrew cleared his throat, trying to project a confidence he no longer possessed. "Yes, Your Majesty. The rogue syndicates have been unusually organized. It has drained our liquid assets, but the Montgomery estate is vast. We offer a 20% equity stake in all future timber exports for the next decade." Genevieve offered a small, terrifyingly cold smile. "A generous offer, considering your timber exports have dropped by 60% in the last 3 years." Victoria scoffed, crossing her arms. "That is a temporary setback. We are still the most prestigious pack in the Pacific Northwest." Genevieve's silver-flecked eyes snapped to Victoria, pinning her to the chair with a look so heavy the Luna physically gasped. "You are prestigious in debt, Victoria. Nothing more." Genevieve raised 2 fingers. Elmira stepped forward, tossing a thick stack of glossy financial records onto the center of the table. They hit the wood with a heavy thud. "In the last 36 months, Genevieve stated smoothly, Silver Pines has taken out massive loans from a human financial institution, Apex Capital. You used these funds not to fortify your borders, but to renovate this estate, purchase 3 yachts, and fund Luna Victoria's completely fictitious non-profit foundations." Elder Harrison turned pale, staring at Andrew. "Alpha, is this true? You told the council the loans were for the border defenses." Andrew's jaw clenched. "It's complicated, Harrison. The optics of wealth project strength to our enemies." "The optics of wealth project vanity," Genevieve interrupted, her tone sharp as a razor. "You bled your pack dry to maintain an illusion, Andrew. And now Apex Capital is calling in the debt. You default at midnight tonight. By tomorrow morning, human banks will foreclose on the Silver Pines territory, effectively rendering 300 wolves homeless and exposing our kind to the human government." Panic flared in Andrew's eyes. "That's why you are here. The Laurentian monarchy can pay off Apex Capital. We will sign whatever treaty you require. You cannot let a pack fall to humans, Genevieve. I know there is history between us. But you must feel some loyalty to your birthplace." The sheer audacity of his plea hung in the air. Genevieve leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her hands steepled together. "I do not owe $50 million to Apex Capital, Andrew. I own Apex Capital." The color completely drained from Andrew's face. The room fell deathly silent. "Through a series of shell companies managed by the Laurentian monarchy. I purchased your debt 6 months ago," Genevieve whispered, her voice carrying the fatal weight of a judge's gavel. "I did not come here to negotiate a bailout. I came here to collect my property." The meeting was adjourned in absolute chaos. Elder Harrison stormed out to convene an emergency session of the Pack Council, realizing their alpha had led them to the slaughter. Victoria, hyperventilating and shrieking about lawsuits, was escorted to her quarters by her personal guards. Genevieve remained in the boardroom, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling grounds that had once been her prison. The rain had started again, drumming against the glass a poetic echo of the night she had been thrown away. The heavy oak doors clicked shut. Andrew had returned, alone. He looked broken. The impeccably tailored suit now seemed too large for him. The arrogant, untouchable alpha was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow shell of a man. "Elmira," Genevieve said softly, not turning around. "Leave us." Elmira hesitated, glaring at Andrew with pure murder in his amber eyes. "My queen." "He is not a threat, Commander. Wait in the hall." With a stiff bow, Elmira exited, leaving Genevieve alone with the man who had shattered her soul. Andrew took a trembling step forward. "Genevieve," he rasped, his voice breaking. "Gigi, please." Genevieve finally turned. Her face was completely devoid of emotion. "Do not call me that. That girl died in the snow 5 years ago." "I was a fool," Andrew pleaded, closing the distance between them. though he stopped a respectful 5 feet away, held back by the crushing pressure of her lichen aura. I was young, and my father had just died. The council was pressuring me to secure a strong alliance. They told me you were weak. They told me you would be a liability as a Luna. And you believed them, Genevieve replied, her voice eerily calm. You looked at your destined mate, felt the pull of the moon goddess, and decided a shipping contract was worth more than your soul. I have regretted it every single day. Andrew choked out, tears finally spilling from his frost-colored eyes. Victoria is a nightmare. There is no bond between us. It's hollow, cold. When I saw you step out of that car today, my wolf howled for you. He knows you are ours. We can fix this. Genevieve tilted her head, observing him as if he were a fascinating, pathetic insect. Fix this? Yes, Andrew urged, stepping closer, reaching a hand out toward her. I will reject Victoria tonight. I will strip her of her title and banish her. I am still the Alpha of Silver Pines. You are the Queen of the North. Together, we would be unstoppable. We can complete the bond, Genevieve. I can give you everything I denied you. For a moment, Genevieve didn't speak. She looked at his outstretched hand, remembering how desperately she had wanted him to reach for her 5 years ago. Then, she laughed. It was a dark, melodic sound that held absolutely no humor, sending a chill straight down Andrew's spine. You think this is a romance, Andrew? Genevieve asked, her silver eyes glowing with a terrifying, unnatural light. You think you can break me, throw me to the wolves, and then invite me back into your bed when I return wearing a crown? I am offering you your rightful place at my side, Andrew argued, desperation making his voice rise. In a blur of motion too fast for the human eye to track, Genevieve closed the distance. She didn't use her claws, but her hand clamped around Andrew's throat with the force of an industrial vice. She slammed the Alpha of Silver Pines backward against the oak-paneled wall. Andrew gasped, his hands flying up to grip her wrist, but she was immovable. He realized with absolute terror that she was infinitely stronger than him. You have no place to offer me, Genevieve snarled, the ancient, guttural voice of her lichen beast bleeding into her words. You broke the bond, Andrew. You severed the thread, and a thread cut by betrayal cannot be tied back together. Suddenly, the boardroom doors flew open. Victoria stood in the doorway, her face contorted in a mask of pure feral rage. Her eyes were fully shifted, glowing yellow. She had heard Andrew offer to reject her. You worthless bitch! Victoria screamed, her fingernails elongating into jagged claws. You will not take my pack! Victoria lunged, aiming to tear Genevieve's throat out. Andrew screamed a warning, but Genevieve didn't even flinch. Without releasing Andrew's throat, Genevieve simply turned her head. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated lichen dominance exploded from her body. It was a physical wall of force. Victoria hit the invisible wall of Genevieve's aura and was thrown backward violently, crashing through the heavy oak doors and skidding across the marble floor of the hallway. She lay there, coughing up blood, her wolf instantly forced into absolute submission, whimpering in terror. Genevieve turned her cold eyes back to a trembling, suffocating Andrew. She released her grip, letting him slide down the wall to his knees, gasping for air. By midnight, you will sign the documents transferring absolute ownership of the Silver Pines territory to the Laurentian monarchy, Genevieve commanded, looking down at him. You and Victoria will be stripped of your titles and banished to the rogue lands, with exactly nothing to your names. She stepped over him, adjusting the cuffs of her jacket. Enjoy the rain, Andrew. Midnight arrived with the heavy tolling strike of the grandfather clock in the estate's grand foyer. Outside, the Pacific Northwest storm raged on, thrashing the ancient cedars that gave Silver Pines its name. Inside, the atmosphere was a suffocating blend of terror and absolute defeat. The entire pack had been summoned to the main hall. 300 wolves stood in dead silence, their eyes fixed on the makeshift dais at the front of the room. Queen Genevieve sat in a high-backed leather chair, her posture impeccably straight, looking like an avenging angel carved from white marble. Almira and 6 of her royal guards formed an impenetrable, terrifying wall of muscle and military-grade weaponry behind her. Standing before her, looking remarkably small, were Andrew and Victoria. The deadline has passed, Genevieve stated, her voice carrying effortlessly over the silent crowd. She gestured to the heavy parchment documents laid out on an antique desk to her left. Sign the transfer of territory, Andrew, or I will let Apex Capital foreclose at 8 a.m., and human law enforcement will forcibly evict every family standing in this room. Andrew stared at the pen. His hands were shaking violently. To sign was to willingly extinguish a 200-year-old dynasty. He looked out at his pack, searching for a single sympathetic face. He found none. Elder Harrison, standing at the front of the crowd, simply nodded toward the desk, his eyes hard. Andrew had bankrupted them. The pack's loyalty was already dead. "Wait!" Victoria shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. She clawed past Andrew, her red silk nightgown torn and her face stained with ruined makeup. "My father is coming. The Blue Ridge Pack will not allow this. We have a treaty." Right on cue, the heavy double doors of the grand foyer swung open. The wind howled through the hall as Alpha Richard Beaumont stepped inside, accompanied by a dozen of his own enforcers. Victoria let out a sob of relief and ran toward him. "Dad! Thank the goddess! Arrest her! She's trying to steal our territory." Richard Beaumont did not open his arms to his daughter. He stopped in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the terrifying contingent of lichen guards before landing on Queen Genevieve. To the absolute shock of the Silver Pines pack, Alpha Beaumont placed his right fist over his heart and bowed his head deeply in a gesture of total submission. "Your Majesty," Beaumont rumbled, his voice respectful and laced with fear. "Alpha Beaumont," Genevieve replied smoothly, not rising from her chair. "I trust you received my financial disclosures regarding your daughter's spending habits and the impending foreclosure?" "I did, my queen," Beaumont said grimly. He turned a cold, calculating gaze upon his daughter. "Dad, what are you doing?" Victoria stammered, backing away. "I am saving the Blue Ridge Pack," Beaumont snapped. He looked back at Genevieve. "The Beaumont family formally dissolves the alliance with Silver Pines. Furthermore, effective immediately, Victoria is disowned from the Blue Ridge bloodline. Her debts and her crimes are her own. We will not challenge the Laurentian monarchy." Victoria collapsed to her knees, screaming in disbelief. Andrew closed his eyes, a single tear cutting through the 5 years of arrogant delusion he had lived in. The realization was absolute. They were entirely, completely alone. Without another word, Andrew walked to the desk. He picked up the heavy gold fountain pen and, with a trembling hand, signed away his birthright. The moment the ink dried, a physical shockwave rippled through the room. The alpha spark, the magical, ancient tether that connected Andrew to the minds and hearts of the Silver Pines. Wolves snapped. Several pack members gasped as the connection was severed. Andrew staggered back, clutching his chest, coughing violently as the power left his body. He was no longer an alpha. He was just a man. Genevieve stood up. The sheer force of her aura expanded, filling the vacuum Andrew had left behind, washing over the 300 wolves with a heavy, protective, and unyielding dominance. By the laws of the Lichen monarchy and the signed surrender of this territory, Andrew Montgomery and Victoria Beaumont are stripped of all rank, title, and property, Genevieve declared, her silver eyes glowing in the dim light. "You are hereby banished. You will leave this estate tonight, with only the clothes on your backs. If you are found within the borders of my kingdom by sunrise, my guards will execute you." "Genevieve, please," Andrew begged, falling to his knees, his pride completely shattered. "It's freezing outside. We have no money. We have nowhere to go." Genevieve walked slowly down the steps of the dais, stopping inches from where Andrew groveled. She looked down at him, her expression a mask of absolute, glacial indifference. "5 years ago, you watched me bleed on this exact floor," she whispered. Her voice meant only for him. "You told me I was a biological glitch. You sent me out into a blizzard, knowing I would likely die. I survived because I am a queen. Now, we will see what you are." She turned her back on him, raising her voice for the guards. "Escort the rogues to the property line. Do not let them take a single coin." Elmira stepped forward, a cruel, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He grabbed Andrew by the scruff of his neck, hauling him to his feet like a misbehaving pup, while 2 other guards dragged a hysterical Victoria toward the doors. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, sealing them out in the freezing, relentless rain. The sun breached the jagged peaks of the Cascade Mountains, casting a brilliant, cold, and unforgiving light over the rain-washed cedar forests of the Pacific Northwest. The storm that had battered the Montgomery estate through the night had finally broken, leaving behind a crisp, biting frost that coated the sprawling lawns in a layer of silver. Inside the estate, a massive, militarized restructuring had been underway since the grandfather clock struck midnight. The Laurentian monarchy operated with a terrifying, bloodless efficiency. By dawn, a fleet of armored transport vehicles had arrived from the northern border. The private human military contractors, former Blackwater operatives that Andrew had foolishly hired on exorbitant retainers to guard his eastern flanks, were unceremoniously dismissed. They were paid out in cash from aluminum briefcases and escorted off the property by towering lichen guards, whose very presence made the battle-hardened human mercenaries sweat. Genevieve Allister, the White Wolf of Oakhaven and the newly minted undisputed ruler of the Silver Pines territory, stood in the center of the master suite. This room had once belonged to the Montgomery Alphas for 4 generations. It was a cavernous space of dark mahogany, vaulted ceilings, and a massive California king bed draped in Egyptian cotton. 5 years ago, Genevieve had been forbidden from even cleaning this floor of the mansion. Now, she owned the very ground it was built upon. She walked slowly to the towering floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a tailored charcoal wool turtleneck and impeccably pressed dark slacks. She held a steaming cup of black coffee, feeling the heat radiate through her palms. She looked down at the courtyard. Below, her lichen enforcers were directing the terrified, bewildered members of the Silver Pines pack. There was no violence, no bloodshed, only absolute, uncompromising order. At 9 a.m. sharp, Genevieve summoned the remaining pack leadership to the grand ballroom. The room that had witnessed her lowest moment was now the staging ground for her empire. The chandeliers were unlit, the morning sun providing all the necessary illumination. 300 wolves sat in folding chairs, their heads bowed, their wolves whimpering in the presence of Genevieve's suffocating, sovereign aura. Elder Harrison sat in the front row, his face pale and drawn, looking every bit his 70 years. Genevieve did not sit. She paced slowly across the polished marble floor, the sharp click of her low heels echoing like gunshots in the silent room. Almira stood to the side of the makeshift stage, his arms crossed over his massive chest, his amber eyes scanning the crowd for any microscopic sign of treason. As of midnight last night, the Silver Pines pack as a sovereign entity ceased to exist. Genevieve's voice rang out, smooth as glass but sharp enough to draw blood. You are now citizens of the Laurentian monarchy, an annexed territory of the Northern Crown. The Montgomery dynasty is dead. The debts that crippled you have been erased. Apex Capital's foreclosure notices have been incinerated. A collective, trembling breath swept through the room. They were saved from the human banks, but they had traded one master for a god. However, Genevieve continued, stopping in the center of the room to lock eyes with Elder Harrison. My charity is not unconditional. Your economy is a disaster. Your lumber mills are operating on machinery from the 1990s, and your export logistics are laughable. By noon, a team of forensic accountants from Deloitte will arrive to audit every single localized asset you possess. We are bringing in Laurentian architects to modernize your infrastructure. You will work, you will rebuild, and you will do it under my laws. She turned, letting her gaze sweep over the faces of the pack members, the very people who had watched Andrew humiliate her, the people who had laughed, who had turned a blind eye to her suffering in the attic. First, Genevieve declared, her voice dropping an octave, taking on the ancient, vibrating resonance of her lichen beast. The caste system is abolished. Effective immediately. There are no more Omegas in this territory. The boarding houses will be condemned and rebuilt. No wolf will scrub floors or sleep in unheated attics, simply because their bloodline is deemed weak by archaic, idiotic standards. Any member of the former elite caught treating another citizen as property will answer directly to Commander Almira. At the mention of his name, Almira let out a low, terrifying rumble from his chest. Several of the wealthier pack members physically shrank in their seats. You will be paid fair wages. You will have access to our northern medical facilities. You will be treated with the dignity that Andrew Montgomery denied you, Genevieve concluded, her silver-flecked eyes blazing. But treason against the crown will be met with immediate execution. I do not demand your love, but I require your absolute loyalty. Are we understood? Yes, Your Majesty, the crowd chorused in unison, a desperate, echoing sound of submission. While Genevieve established a new era of prosperity within the estate, a vastly different reality was unfolding 30 miles away on the shoulder of Interstate 90. The brutal Pacific Northwest weather had no mercy for the exiled. Andrew Montgomery and Victoria Beaumont were trudging through the muddy gravel of the highway shoulder, soaked to the bone. The freezing rain had turned Victoria's torn red silk nightgown into a heavy, icy trap. Her bare feet were bleeding, cut by sharp rocks and shattered glass on the roadside. Andrew was in a state of psychological collapse. The severing of his alpha spark had left a gaping, agonizing void in his chest. Without the connection to a pack, a wolf's natural healing abilities plummeted, He felt the biting cold seeping into his joints. He was shivering uncontrollably. The bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo jacket completely ruined, heavy with mud and rain. "We need to stop," Victoria sobbed, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form the words. "Andrew, I can't walk anymore. My feet are freezing. We have to call someone." "Call who, Victoria?" Andrew snapped, his voice hoarse and raw. "With what phone? With what money? Your father disowned you. The pack is gone. We have nothing." Victoria stopped, wrapping her arms around her shivering frame. The superficial beauty that had made her the prize of the Blue Ridge pack was completely stripped away, leaving only a terrified, venomous woman. She looked at Andrew, her eyes narrowing with a sudden vicious hatred. "This is your fault," she hissed, stepping toward him. "You told me the northern savages were a myth. You told me we were untouchable. But you threw away a lichen queen. You rejected her for me, and then you bankrupted us trying to pretend you were half the leader your father was." "Shut up!" Andrew roared, stepping forward, instinctively trying to project his alpha dominance. But nothing happened. There was no oppressive weight, no glowing eyes. He was just a cold, desperate man yelling on a highway. Victoria laughed a sharp, hysterical, mocking sound that cut Andrew deeper than any claw. "You're nothing now, Andrew. You're not an alpha. You're not even a man. You're a beggar." The roar of an approaching engine interrupted them. A battered, rusted Ford F-150 was barreling down the wet asphalt of the interstate. Victoria didn't hesitate. She threw herself toward the edge of the road, waving her arms frantically, flashing the driver a desperate, pathetic plea for salvation. The truck's brakes squealed, tires kicking up a massive spray of dirty water that coated Andrew from the waist down. The passenger door popped open. A heavy-set human man in a flannel shirt looked out, his eyes sweeping over Victoria's torn silk and shivering form. "Need a ride, sweetheart?" the man called out over the idling engine. Victoria scrambled toward the cab. "Victoria, wait!" Andrew yelled, panic seizing his throat. "We have to stick together. We're wolves. We can survive the wilderness if we get to the Snoqualmie Pass." Victoria paused with one foot inside the warm cab of the truck. She looked back at Andrew standing in the freezing mud. There was no bond between them, no loyalty, only the shattered remnants of a political alliance built on vanity. "I'm not dying in the woods with a failure," Victoria spat. She climbed inside, slamming the heavy metal door shut. The truck's engine revved, its tires spinning on the wet pavement before catching traction. Andrew stood paralyzed, the icy rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead as he watched the taillights of the Ford disappear into the gray morning mist. He was completely, utterly alone. The crushing weight of his choices finally broke his mind. Andrew Montgomery collapsed to his knees in the mud on the side of the highway, burying his face in his freezing hands, and let out a broken human scream that was swallowed by the roar of the wind. Genevieve was right. Death would have been a mercy. This was hell. Back at the Silver Pines estate, the evening had begun to settle. The frantic energy of the day's restructuring had slowed to a manageable hum. Genevieve stepped out onto the expansive stone balcony of the master suite. The rain had cleared entirely, revealing a breathtaking canopy of stars piercing the dark velvet of the night sky. She leaned against the heavy stone balustrade, taking a deep breath of the pine-scented air. The phantom ache in her chest, the lingering ghost of the rejected mate bond, was finally, completely gone. It had been replaced by the heavy, satisfying warmth of a kingdom secured. A soft click sounded from the glass doors behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The rich, grounding scent of cedarwood, metal, and ancient power washed over her, a stark contrast to the sterile, rain-washed air. Elmira stepped out onto the balcony, shedding his heavy tactical jacket and tossing it onto a patio chair. He stood beside her, his massive frame radiating a comfortable, protective heat. "The transition is ahead of schedule," Elmira said quietly, looking out over the dark tree line. "The Deloitte auditors have frozen all Montgomery assets. The human banks are satisfied, and Elder Harrison has submitted the revised territorial maps. The South is yours, Genevieve." "The South is ours, Commander," Genevieve corrected softly, turning her head to look at him. Elmira's amber eyes shifted to meet hers. For a long moment, the strict, unyielding military decorum that usually separated them seemed to evaporate into the night air. The tension between them, forged in the frozen wastes of the Yukon and tempered by years of bloody training and political warfare, shifted into something infinitely heavier. "The moon goddess," Elmira began, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble, "is a cruel deity. She ties strings between children, forcing bonds based on biological compatibility rather than the strength of one's spirit. It is a flawed system. It breeds weak alphas like Andrew. Genevieve turned fully toward him, her heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against her ribs. And the lichen way? The lichens do not wait for the stars to dictate our fate. Almira stepped closer, the physical space between them disappearing until she had to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. We choose. We find our equals in the fires of battle. We find the one soul whose power matches our own, whose mind can carry the weight of the crown, a chosen mate. He reached out, his massive, calloused hand gently brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. The touch sent a shockwave of electricity straight to her core, igniting a feral, possessive heat in her awakened lichen beast that the moon goddess's flimsy string never could have achieved. "You were a broken girl when I pulled you from the snow," Almira whispered, his amber eyes burning with a raw, undisguised devotion. "But I watched you forge yourself into a weapon. I watched you bleed, and study, and conquer. I stepped down from my throne because I knew, the moment your eyes opened in the citadel, that I was looking at the true monarch. You are my queen, Genevieve." In every sense of the word, Genevieve looked up at the man who had saved her life, the man who had taught her how to hold a sword and how to read a balance sheet. Andrew had demanded she shrink herself to fit into his pathetic, superficial world. Almira had given her a kingdom and demanded she grow large enough to rule it. She reached up, her hands resting flat against the solid, immovable muscle of his chest. She felt the heavy, thundering heartbeat of the ancient beast beneath his skin. "A queen cannot rule a continent alone," Genevieve whispered, a genuine, radiant smile finally breaking through her mask of ice. "I need my commander, and I choose you, Almira. I have always chosen you." Almira's hand slipped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. When he kissed her, there was no gentle, hesitant spark. It was a collision of titans, a searing, world-altering brand that cemented the union of the North and the South. It was the absolute, undeniable birth of a new dynasty. The white monarchy had dawned, and the wolves of the world would forever bow to the queen they had once thrown away. The story of Genevieve Allister is a testament to the fact that destiny is not written in the stars, but forged in the fires of survival. When Andrew Montgomery rejected his fated mate for political convenience, he believed he was discarding a worthless omega. He failed to understand that the severing of their bond was not a punishment, but a liberation. It freed a dormant lichen queen to claim her birthright in the freezing expanses of the Laurentian monarchy. True power in the werewolf world is not measured by the cruelty of an alpha, but by the resilience of those they cast into the dark. Genevieve returned not just with wealth and an army, but with a soul hardened by ice and absolute authority. She did not just survive her heartbreak, she weaponized it, proving that the most dangerous creature is a queen who has built her own throne.